President Biden thanked young voters for showing up for Democrats in historic numbers this Tuesday. Let's watch.
And I especially want to thank the young people of this nation who, I'm told, I haven't seen the numbers, voted historic numbers again. And just as they did 2 years ago. They voted to continue addressing the climate crisis, gun violence, their personal rights and freedoms, and the student debt relief.
The president's loan forgiveness plan may have been what stopped a red wave, garnering support from younger Gen Z voters and incentivizing them to show up to the polls. That's according to a new article in Business Insider. According to Circle analysis of 2022 Edison National Exit Poll data, roughly 27% of the youth, ages 18 to 29, cast a ballot in the 2022 midterms, and 63% of these voters supported Democrats, with 35% for Republicans, 89% of black youth, and 68% of Latino youths under 30 voting for a Democratic House candidate.
A Wall Street Journal poll last week found that while 48% of the public favored Biden's debt relief plan, 59% of voters aged 18 to 34 backed the plan. And a Morning Consult poll from last year found that millennial voters are the most likely group to support nationwide student debt forgiveness, with Gen Zers second most likely, followed by Gen Xers and then baby boomers.
I mean, which makes sense because a lot of Gen Zers are still in college. Millennials are.
Well, right, but also Gen Xers and baby boomers didn't have to pay $70,000 a year to go to college. I mean, there was an exponential rise in the cost of college just between the millennials and Gen X generation over the course of like 15 to 20 years. So a lot of boomers are just, I'm sorry, including Joe Biden, are painfully out of touch about the different conditions that younger voters are under. But I bring Biden into this only because during the primary, he was asked whether or not he had sympathy for younger voters. And he said explicitly on the campaign trail, no, I don't have any sympathy for them at all. So that's where a lot of people were, and activists have pulled him kicking and screaming to take the position that he's taking now on student debt relief, which was way to the right of most other candidates in the Democratic primary, by the way. And yet, even doing a kind of a milquetoast service to student debtors, it's paid off big. So, you know, as we said, Democratic voters, 30 to 34 up to 18 to 29 up 28. And if it had not been for the unprecedented turnout among youth voters that was matched only by a 2018 turnout, we would have been in a very different situation today, potentially.
Yeah, look, as I've made clear on the show, I absolutely disagree with this policy. I wish they hadn't done it, but for the political optics of it, you might very well be right. I would see no reason to disagree. I can absolutely accept that it was a politically smart move that did, and that he was rewarded with high turnout among young people, among people who hold debt for Democrats. That seems perfectly plausible and probably speaks to a need for Republicans to, if they're going to oppose this policy, and again, I think they should because I also oppose it, they're going to need to come up with some kind of language about, well, if you're going to oppose this, what are you going to do to fix the cost of college problem?
I agree. You need to fix the cost of college problem. But look what happened to the Democrats who took that line as opposed to the Democrats that supported Joe Biden's policy. Tim Ryan lost in Ohio. He came out strong against Joe Biden's student debt relief policy, saying that it was unfair to the people of Ohio to cancel debt for this population. And Cortez Masto, who was struggling to make up loss, coming up from behind, said that she disagreed with the White House's blanket forgiveness policy because it does not address the underlying issues with college affordability. She said, quote, I don't agree with today's executive action because it doesn't address the root problems that make college affordable. We should be focusing on my legislation to expand Pell Grants for lower income students, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. I completely agree that there needs to be a more comprehensive approach here, but instead of saying yes and actually fighting for a more comprehensive approach and saying if Democrats stay in power, this is what we're going to get, they naysayed, said no, painted themselves as enemies of the kinds of programs that really help a lot of struggling Americans. A huge number of people in her district, 11% I believe of her district have student loans, and I bet as she is trailing by such a small margin, she wishes some of those people had come out with her because of her enthusiasm.
But I guess the devil's advocate argument is there. I mean, you saw the polling for student debt forgiveness. Yes, maybe she would gain voters among young voters if she supported it, but theoretically could have lost people on the other side of that question. I mean, we don't know.
The theoretical voter who was otherwise going to vote for the Democratic Senate candidate, but for their support of student debt cancellation.
I mean, that was the calculation they made, I guess.
And I think that the proof is in the pudding. And, her not, expecting not to come out on top probably in that race, and Tim Ryan's colossal failure tracking with low youth turnout shows that there are consequences. So Democrats and Republicans alike spend a lot of time pandering to homeowners, pandering to, frankly, people who are much more economically affluent, tax cuts that overwhelmingly benefit the rich. At the same time, they ignore working class population, students, and others that have been left behind. And I think this is a real moment for working people to realize that their votes matter, and that if they are able to leverage their vote and show that they're willing to turn out when they're actually given policies that benefit them, then they will get stuff in return. The only question now is whether or not Joe Biden will actually follow through on his promise to, in fact, cancel the $10,000 to $20,000 for the poorest Americans that he's promised to cancel.
What do you mean follow through? That's what he's doing.
Well, it's been held up in the courts.
Well, right, but he can't do anything about that.
Well, he could have immediately canceled student debt instead of making it a means-tested program, in which case there wouldn't have been these opportunities for people to obstruct. And that's what a lot of the student debt advocates have been saying, that he's basically set it up to give himself an out if he wants to. Now, it looks like there's a likelihood that he's going to be successful and overcome these lawsuits. There was a recent story that the plaintiff in the main suit, Myra Brown, actually got a $50,000 government bailout for PPP loans and is now suing because of other people getting $10,000 of student loan debt canceled. I think this is a real stinker for conservatives on the Democratic side and the Republican side alike who are opposing this policy, because it's very clear that the government has absolutely no problem giving handouts to the rich and not to poor, struggling students.
But a lot of these conservatives would have opposed those handouts as well.
Yeah, but they took them, didn't they?
Yeah, I guess so. Republicans need to shift the discussion of what's wrong with education from a curriculum basis to a funding basis, to the system that is creating these debtors.
I think so.
Talk about the cost being adequate. You talked about the rise of the cost in the last 20, 30 years. You can track it to the administrative bloat at so many of these institutions. The level of funding and paying for administrators versus teachers, not teachers, but the administrators, to make the college experience more fancier. That's what they're paying for, at no increase to the educational quality whatsoever.
Well, I think I would track it closer to the fact of guaranteed federal funds. How are you able to fund administrators? How are you able to fund bloat? It's because you have guaranteed federal backing. One follows the other. I don't think that schools are just randomly engaging in that kind of an arms race for better facilities, et cetera, for no reason. I think a lot of the bloat also comes from athletic programs and other non-educational related
it's not
things.
for no reason. It's to attract more students so they get more of those federal subsidies.
Right, exactly. And I think that if we're going to sit around talking about, I mean, professors are underpaid. Adjunct professors are carrying an enormous amount of the educational burden without being compensated. Meanwhile, millions of dollars are going to sports facilities, and millions of the dollars that are going to fund those sports facilities are going to Brett Favre's pet projects, apparently. So there's a lot of problems here, but I definitely agree that the fundamental flaw here is that there are federally guaranteed loans that are causing the price of college to grow exponentially. Well, Bernie Sanders has a plan for that. There's a bill there to vote for if anybody actually cares to address it and make public colleges and universities tuition free the way we were moving toward in the 1960s and 1970s, and the way that so many other successful.
Well, something has to change. Without any tweaks to the system, there will be the same amount of cumulative college debt a few years from now as there was now. I guess Democrats can forgive a piece of it. Then maybe they could set themselves up so every election you could forgive a little bit of college debt right before the election, win,
just like
and
tax
then
cuts
do
for the
nothing.
rich come on a periodic basis, and lowering the wealth tax and things like that.
I think confiscating less of people's money is not morally equivalent to giving people more of other people's
telling
money.
Rich people they don't have to pay their fair share, and they have the lower tax brackets in their secretaries.
How about we have everyone have a lower? I don't want secretaries to pay taxes either. Shrink everybody's taxes down to nothing. Nothing.
All right. Well,
how about a government that is voluntary basis of payment?
That sounds like a really great plan for rich people. I'm sure we'll continue this discussion and we'll have more Rising for you after this.